Welcome to the Marriage Steps podcast, where developing a long-lasting, happy relationship is the status symbol to achieve, and following my 6 marriage steps is a path to help get you there. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, a licensed psychologist specializing in marriage counseling. The Marriage Steps podcast is listener-supported, so to help keep it on the air, so couples worldwide can receive hope for their marriage, please consider becoming a monthly supporter by going to patreon.com/marriage steps. Happy New Year, everybody. I haven't done an episode in 2 weeks. I took 2 weeks off just to recharge my batteries, and I have missed doing the podcast. I love doing the podcast and passing on to you little tidbits of knowledge, of wisdom, of information that hopefully helps your relationship. And I love it when you leave reviews because it shows me that this podcast is having an impact. And here's a recent review. Incredibly valuable, solution-oriented relationship advice. This information should be ideally taught before getting married and reviewed regularly during marriage. Bravo, Dr. Fisher. And that's from Boulderitted B. That's the person who left that review. Thank you. If you're listening, thank you for leaving that review. It's so humbling when I get reviews like that because I underestimate the impact that the podcast has on people, and so I appreciate your feedback so much. It helps me know that it's making an impact, that it matters, that it's actually helping, because I record this by myself. I'm in my little studio recording this all by myself, and so I love your feedback to know that it's really helping and it's getting through and it's making a difference. On that note, I'm going to start my first giveaway, my first raffle, and it starts today. So what you win in this raffle is a free marriage tool. I've developed 10 marriage tools. They're on my website under marriage tools, and they're for a variety of things. One marriage tool is the wedding cake model. That's for sexual intimacy. Another marriage tool is called the reunite tool, and that one is for conflict resolution and resentments. Another tool is called bounce the ball, and that's for sharing power. There's 10 tools. Each tool is $10. So I'm going to give away some free tools. So the way for you to enter this giveaway is you need to leave a review of the podcast, of the Marriage Steps podcast in Apple. So if you have an Apple device, an Apple phone, and you're listening to the podcast through Apple, just leave a review and then take a screenshot of the review that you leave and then email me the screenshot. My email is info@drwyattfisher.com, drwyattfisher.com, info@drwyattfisher.com. So leave a review on Apple of the podcast, take a screenshot, email it to me. Then by next Tuesday, which is January 12th, you have until January 12th. So I'll get all your emails, and then I'm going to pick 3 of you randomly, and then you 3 are going to get a free marriage tool of your choice. So I'll send you the link, you tell me which one you want, and I'll give it to you for free. The marriage tools are a video clip of me demonstrating the tool, talking about the tool, unpacking the tool, role-playing the tool. Then you and your partner can watch it repeatedly until you gain competence. So I hope you join the raffle. Again, leave a review of the podcast, take a screenshot, email it to me. Then by next January 12th, next Tuesday, I'll pick 3 random winners for a free marriage tool. The marriage message of the day is 4 steps to a positive marriage year. This is the time of New Year resolutions. Some of you may get into that, some of you may not. I've always been a big believer in marriage or in New Year resolutions because I'm very goal-directed, very goal-oriented. And so I love New Year resolutions. A lot of people hate them. But consider having some New Year resolutions for your marriage. We make New Year resolutions for all sorts of things. We make them for our money. We make them for our health. We make them for our kids. But a lot of times, we don't make them for our marriage. Have you? Have you and your partner sat down and made some concrete marriage resolutions for your relationship? This episode is all about that. So as we go through this, consider the acronym SMART. A lot of you may have heard of SMART, but SMART goals tend to increase the likelihood of them happening. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time specific. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time specific. That's a SMART goal. And research shows the more specific a goal becomes, the more likely you're going to achieve it. And you want a goal to feel not too easy or not too difficult, because moderate difficulty also raises motivation to achieve it. So as you think about these marriage goals, make sure they're not too overwhelming, make sure they're not too easy, and make sure they're concrete and specific, and you have a time deadline. So, first thing to consider with having a good marriage year, number one, consolidate the strengths. What are your strengths as a couple? Some of you may not know what they are because you're in a winter season right now. But really try to spend some time to begin with by consolidating the strengths. Most likely you have strengths as a couple. You just might need to search for them. But it's helpful to realize what your strengths are. What is it for you? What do you tend to do well as a couple? What tends to be your sweet spot? What tends to be your natural power punch that you know you can lean on that area because you're good at it? What is that for you as a couple? For my wife and I, one natural strength that we have is we tend to prioritize quality time. You've heard me talk a lot about mini dates, having 4 mini dates a week. My wife and I have that. We do 4 mini dates. It's Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, and Saturday nights. And we try to hit around 2 hours each time, give or take. So that tends to be a strength for us. We've always had a tendency to prioritize quality time for our marriage. What's yours? It's going to make you feel better about working on the growth areas in your marriage if you first recognize your strengths as a couple. And that leads me into step number 2. Consolidate the weaknesses of your marriage. What are your weaknesses? Maybe for some of you is you don't cultivate emotional intimacy well. Maybe that's your weakness. For others of you, maybe you don't cultivate sexual intimacy very well. Maybe that's your weakness. Maybe for others of you, you don't share power very well. You don't bounce the ball. Maybe that's your weakness. For the others of you, perhaps you're not a unified front with your children. Maybe that's your weakness. Maybe for others of you, it's money because you're not on the same page and you don't develop a budget and you don't have a strategy around money. You're not a team around money. Maybe that's your weakness. What is it for you? You want to think about what your top areas are in your marriage that are a weakness. Pick out the top 3, your top 3 weaknesses in your marriage, because that needs to become your focus for the new year. For 2021, you want to consolidate your top 3 weaknesses because those need to become your marriage goals. So what is it for you? Talk about this with your partner. You may have different ideas of what the weaknesses are compared to your partner. So you need to negotiate and consolidate your list and their list so you have a converged list of your top 3 areas you want to work on. You're not going to develop any goals if you first don't sit down and get organized with the weaknesses that need improvement. And that leads me to number 3. Number 3 is you want to gather resources. So for example, let's say that you and your partner decide one of your top growth areas as a couple is money. So you want to gather resources. And that means you need to gather some information about money, on how to handle money as a couple. Maybe you need to get some books. Maybe you need to research some top websites. Maybe you need to sign up for some newsletters. Maybe you need to find some podcasts that are just about money. What is it for you? Maybe you need to meet with a financial advisor. But gather resources. One of the best marriage books I recommend that I've enjoyed is Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. He also has a podcast called The Dave Ramsey Show. It's an excellent resource because it helps you as a couple get on the same page and you develop a plan. He has 7 steps that he will walk you through financially. And you have to be a team together on finances for it to work. So others of you, perhaps your growth area is emotional intimacy, like I mentioned. So gather resources. Maybe you need to buy some books that talk about how to cultivate emotional intimacy. My new book, Total Marriage Refresh, talks about it. That's marriage step number 4. It's all about establishing and developing emotional attachment. So gather some resources. Maybe there's some websites you can go to for emotional intimacy. Maybe there's some newsletters you can sign up for. Gather resources. For the others of you, for example, if your growth area is sexual intimacy, gather resources, get some books that are just about sexual intimacy. A great one that I recommend on my website for sexual intimacy is called Come As You Are. It's an excellent book written by a woman for women, but it's also good for men to read it because you can learn at the same time as your wife is learning. But you need to gather resources, do some research online on sexual intimacy, how to improve sexual intimacy, gather some websites, sign up for some newsletters. Information is king. It always has been. One of my personal hobbies, as I've told you, is reading about famous people in history. And most famous people in history have written great works, especially the founding fathers. So I've done a lot of reading, a lot of biography reading on the founding fathers. And most of them were prolific writers. They would write. And back in those days, they would write for newspapers. And they would have opposing views, and they would use fake names, and they would articulate thousands and thousands of words through the newspapers. And they became well known for their writing. And not much has changed. Content is king. Information is king. So with the goal, the areas that you're going to develop this year, you need to gather information. You need to gather content. And then you need to devour the content. You need to read the books. You need to listen to the podcast. You need to read the newsletters. You need to read the blog posts. One thing I would encourage you to do when you have these 4 mini dates throughout the week, make sure you start those with some type of information about your marriage growth areas. So as I've shared before in the past, the biggest growth area my wife and I have faced in our history is our sexual intimacy, largely because of trauma in my wife's history. And then when that trauma would surface in our marriage, I responded poorly, and so we had vicious cycles. And so one thing we've done through the years is every time we have our mini date, we would start that mini date with reading a resource on sexual intimacy because that was our area of brokenness. That's where we needed the most help. And we still do that because we still want to keep that area under a microscope because it's been such a challenging area for us. We want to keep the spotlight on it and continue to grow in it and learn and develop. Learning never stops. If you ever think you've arrived, that's a very dangerous place to be because then that's when you start to drift. And so always have this heart of a student where you want to continue to grow, continue to learn, and you do that by gathering content and consuming content. Number 4 is you want to see a counselor. Now, you only need to see a counselor if after you've gathered this content for your marriage growth areas and you're learning together and you're reading this information, if that is not enough, if you get stuck, if you find yourself at an impasse with your partner and the resources are not enough, see a marriage counselor because that's what they're trained to do. You see a plumber for your toilet, you see a dentist for your teeth, you see a mechanic for your car, go to a marriage counselor for your marriage. And as I mentioned before, most couples wait 4 to 7 years before seeing a marriage counselor. Don't wait. Because by the time you finally see a marriage counselor, if you've waited that long, one of you is hanging on by a thread. One of you already has 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Don't let that be you. Be proactive. Reach out for help. That's why there's marriage counselors. No matter where you live, type into Google marriage counseling and you'll see the local results. And look for the ones who have the most reviews and the highest reviews. So those are 4 steps to have a positive marriage new year. Number 1, consolidate the strengths of your marriage. Number 2, consolidate the weaknesses. Number 3, gather resources. And then number 4, if the resources are not enough, see a marriage counselor. Thank you for listening to the Marriage Steps podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave a review and take a screenshot and email it to me by January 12th for your chance to win a free marriage tool. Also, I want to remind you, every Saturday at 12 noon Mountain Standard Time, I'm doing live Q&A. It's like office hours for your teacher. So I'm doing live office hours every Saturday, 12 noon Mountain Standard Time on Facebook and Instagram. So just go to my page and then you'll see me there, and bring your marriage question, and I'll do my best to respond back. One last reminder is, if this marriage podcast has helped you, be sure to email me, because I'd love to interview you on the show, have you do a We're in Love screen, because your story will inspire others. And finally, remember, your marriage is alive. So if you care for it, it will grow. If you neglect it, it will die. The choice is up to you.